Our criminal justice system isn't as smart as it should be. It's not keeping us as safe as it should be. It is not as fair as it should be. Mass incarceration makes our country worse off, and we need to do something about it.
Former President Barack Obama's push for criminal justice reform. Remember those days? Made him the first president in decades to leave the prison population smaller than when he took office. Yet, mass incarceration continues to plague our nation. The U.S. has the world's highest incarceration rate, with nearly 2 million people behind bars nationally. Now, an inventive new novel is taking this broken justice system to a dystopian level. Chain Gang All-Star satirizes a prison system that pits criminals against each other for public entertainment, offering a fight to the death in exchange for freedom. The New York Times calls it an act of protest that doesn't preach. And the shocking thing is, this is literally a case of art imitates life. There have been numerous examples of inmates being forced into gladiator-style fights over the last few decades. Joining me now to discuss this new award-winning book of Chain Gang All-Stars is Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. Nana, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really enjoyed this book. I have to start with asking this. What was your inspiration? Because I'm reading it and I'm thinking Rollerball in the 70s. I'm thinking the original Running Man. I'm thinking B Planet, which I can't say the name of, a comic book about disruptive women who are sent to a penal colony in space to fight for their justice. What inspired you to write this book?
First off, thank you so much for having me. And I think many of the things you just mentioned were like at least in the zeitgeist and informed my sensibility about the subject generally and offered me sort of permission to engage the issue of the carceral state in a new kind of way. And yes, probably it's a number of books, but really it's just a life. My father was a criminal defense attorney when he was alive, a criminal defense attorney while he was alive. And I remember at a young age him telling me after he was sort of involved with defending someone who had committed murder, that, after I kind of was wondering, why would you do that? I remember him telling me, it's not that simple. People are complicated. And that's probably the biggest inspiration I had.
So when you're putting this book together, it's the two main characters. I don't want to give away too much. Two main characters are two queer women who are part of this sort of gladiator combat. But you do an excellent job of world building because there's a whole ecosystem connected to this gladiator combat. You've got sort of a privatized prison system that runs all these prisons. Yeah. You've got television networks. You've got weird pieces of technology that are used to inflict pain and relieve pain one way or another. My question for you is, when you were building the world, what did you draw upon that actually exists today to make this future dystopia?
Well, some of the facts you just brought up, the fact that America is a world leader in incarceration, the way that there is a long history of fights that are forced upon inmates. There's just so many different types of violences that the carceral state is really good at administering. As made famous by Ava DuVernay, we know that slavery is very explicitly protected in our Constitution. And so once slavery is on the table, really, for profit, anything can be done. And we also know about the private prison industry. So all these facts helped me build up sort of the fundamental idea and like sort of the fundamental approaches to what would become this blood sport that is the heart of the book.
You know, it's interesting. There's a great moment in the book about this character who's justifying watching these inmate showdowns. They say, a study in humanity that she decided any intellectual, socially aware person at least had to peruse. It was part of the cultural conversation. And even if she was ambivalent about its ethics, she couldn't pretend it wasn't an interesting part of the world. It's very similar to the attitude that people use to still watch bullfights, still watch other forms of sports and combat in this country. When you were sort of choosing the different perspectives on this, did you interview people? Did you interview people who, were medical doctors who worked in the NFL who are like, yeah, I know I'm putting people out there that could be getting concussions? Were you talking to people who were working in track who are like, yeah, sometimes I may be administering steroids? Who did you talk to sort of help build this world?
Well, mostly I had access to people who are working as advocates for the incarcerated. I work with a group called the Rockland Coalition to End the New Jim Crow, and building a part of that community created a great sense of awareness and sort of really internalized the issue for me, speaking to those people who themselves were justice impacted. And when I think about that sort of attitude that just was described in the section you mentioned just now, that's so many of us. We're all complicit to some level, not even the person who's maybe directly injecting steroids into an athlete, but all of us who sort of sit by idly, knowing that we have an institution that administers violence and harm in response to people who do violence and harm.
And I want to say this quick. I've said before, I think we should end policing as it currently exists. I'm a police abolitionist. I'm not quite a prison abolitionist, which is a key part of what you're writing about in this book. But I want to also point this out. You have amazing endnotes and in-text notes that allow people to sort of understand how the state of our current world is very similar to what's in the book. Do you find that people, when they've read this book, are coming back to you saying, I didn't know things were this bad? Are people coming back to you and saying, you know, they feel inspired to push against the carceral state? What kinds of responses have you been getting as people are reading this book?
Yeah, I've just come off like a pretty intense tour around the country. I had 19 flights in 20 days, and I've had an incredible chance to talk to people about the book. And for the most part, they've told me they've really come to know that they can embrace abolition in a new way, because it's really about being an additive process. It's not about snapping our fingers and saying there's no prisons. It's about changing the paradigm and growing infrastructure and resources from a place of compassion, from a place that really views human life as sacred. And then we can engage the carceral state more meaningfully. We can really hold people
in a more meaningful way.
In a more meaningful way, absolutely.
Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, thank you so much. His book, Chain Gang All-Stars, is out right now.